Everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I welcome you all for the discussion on STI policy governance and program linkages. It is the 15th thematic panel under our series called Across the Table, an initiative brought to you by Science Policy Forum in partnership with Gooby Labs. I'm Nimita Pandey, and I'll be moderating today's session with Chagun Basha. Before starting today's session, I take this opportunity to brief you about the STIP 2020 process. The formulation of the Science, Technology and Innovation Policy 2020 is initiated jointly by the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India and the Department of Science and Technology. The formulation process consists of 4 interlinked tracks, the first track being the wider public consultation. Track 2 focuses on thematic group discussions. Track 3 focuses on interministerial and state level consultation. And track 4 that includes apex level stakeholders engagement. This thematic panel series, Across the Table, is an exclusive part of the track 1 deliberations to bring in diverse voices in making this policy making process more inclusive and participatory. So I'll come back to today's discussion on STIP.
Yeah, Nimita? Yeah, I'm going to fill in until Nimita comes back. So today's discussion is primarily going to be on 2 aspects. One is the governance aspects of science, technology, and innovation policy, which is a whole lot of sub-blocks and spectrum of activities. And the second block is program linkages. Usually people say this cliche term that policy was good, but the implementation was the failure. Or policy did not succeed because we did not have a proper governance structure. So these are the 2 important strands that we will be touching today. And if my co-moderator Nimita is back on call, we will get her started. Otherwise, I think we can go with the flow right now. Nimita? Yeah, it looks like there is an issue at Nimita's end. So I'm going to continue with that spirit that we have these 2 main strands of STI policy to be covered today in this thematic panel. There is also a very specific reason why we have this particular panel towards the end of this thematic panel series. We started with open access, health, and other aspects such as innovation, entrepreneurship, international engagement. Yesterday, we had a stellar panel on international S&T engagement. The reason the policy governance comes at the end is because this is like a connecting, overall connecting point or a knot in making this policy successful, not just with respect to STIP 2020, the current policy, but broadly to build capacity both at the institutional level and at the governance level for science, technology, and policy systems in our country. With that, without further ado, already Nimita has talked about how this particular activity, which is the thematic panel, is connected to this policy making process, policy drafting process. I'm going to go to a little bit of a detail in how exactly we are planning to connect this discussion not only to the track 2 where the drafting is going on, but also broadly with the other tracks where the track 3 we know already Dr. Arora is here, Secretary from Rajasthan is here. We already initiated discussion under track 3 with them, and we are planning to take up not only for this policy but beyond this policy, how to build systems and architectures where the state plays a major role, and maybe through one or through example states we build a state-center relationship in STA policy governance. There also we aim to touch upon in today's discussion how in detail we can go to capture some of the nuances of state characteristics when it comes to science, technology, and innovation. we would aim to do in this 2-hour conversation, because I'm quite excited about having two of these powerful states represented here by these amazing individuals, and I'm sure they have a lot to contribute. In that respect, there is also one more important point: how other tracks such as track 4, where institutional representation, the states, global institutions, and institutions that are collectively representing industry bodies are going to take inputs from this particular thematic panel. With that, I will also say that track 1 is kind of connecting with and beyond this policy, also in other aspects, pillar aspects of making this policy more inclusive and more diverse and more bottom up. With that, let me begin with our first round in this session. Before that, let me check if my co-moderator is back on call. Is Nimita back? Yeah, I feel she is also facing the same internet issue because it's raining here. Going to continue with this conversation. I'm sure we will win over the technological difficulties that we are facing right now in this conversation. Let me begin with introducing our panelists, and then to go with asking their introductory remarks for this particular panel. We have an eminent set of people here. Let me begin with someone who is like a godfather for all of us, not only in the policy system, but broadly in the STA governance system. Dr. Hiro Bhojwani, he comes from a vast experience. He's someone who is very rare to find in today's setup, because he is working closely with the STIP 2020, the current policy. But the very interesting fact is he was directly involved in previous 3 policies of Government of India with respect to science and technology. He was involved in Technology Policy Statement of 1983, Science and Technology Policies of 2003, and Science Tech Innovation Policy of 2013. So, I mean, I feel really privileged and honored to have him here in this panel, because his institutional memory is something beyond our comprehension to say how it's gonna greatly add value to whatever we're gonna discuss today. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Bhojwani. I would like to begin with your introductory remarks to say, how would you evaluate our STA policy governance system as it exists today in India? Over to you, Dr. Bhojwani.
Just a minute, yeah. Thank you, Chagun. Basically, let me go through a little bit of a history. If you recall, the Scientific Policy Resolution of 58 is only 1 page, is not more than a page. So it's a very short document, and basically it shows the intention of the government that time, especially of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and his love for science and his belief that science and technology was not that much in vogue at that time. How technology could benefit our economic development and the society at large. So basically, it was an aspirational document trying to say what the government would do. It would accord science a very high position and accord scientists a high position in society, respect in society. And basically, it was because of Nehru and its continuation of the government at that time. This this policy was implemented greatly. We built up the scientific infrastructure in the country, the CSIR, the atomic energy, the variety of science, AIMS, IITs, and so on and so forth. So, in a sense, the continuity of the government and the commitment of the government, since there was hardly any scientific infrastructure at the time of independence. We had less than 10 engineering colleges when India became free. And today you look at the number of colleges. So basically it was a document and a policy to build up the infrastructure and scientific infrastructure in the country. And basically it succeeded. Then we come to the Technology Policy Statement of 1983. You have to look at the situation at that time. The situation in 1983 was very desperate. While we had established quite a reasonably good national innovation system, we had higher educational institutions, we had an industry, and we had economic development taking place. But at the
science, people think it is only physics, chemistry, biology, right? They don't know that science has so many dimensions. So to be able to explain science to people, you need systems and structures, as you very rightly mentioned. But if you look at the national educational policy which has been launched, they have put the A of arts in the STEM of science subjects, right? And this is coming together of systems, because right now in the government, what happens is, see, I am also a service provider. I am that bridge between science and society and scientists, right? So it's very important to have structures in place, to have systems in place, because sometimes we say that, you know, everything is right, but the system doesn't allow us to do. And I can tell you for one thing, I have done many roles in various departments, but in this present department, the beauty of science is that that science also has everything under the sky. In fact, it should be the premium department under which all department in terms of service provision should fall. The other beauty is that if you look at your current GDP of the country, you will realize that there are three, sectors of production: the primary sector, the secondary sector, and the tertiary sector. The tertiary sector is basically your service sector, and 65% of the GDP of our country comes from the service sector, and there is no service sector which can exist without research, without science, without technology, without innovation. So science becomes very, very important, and stakeholders become very important. The other thing that I feel is a lack, and I think which we should all together work, is science statistics. I think Dr. Bhojwani said something very nice, that for the first time, I think in 2003, he mentioned, if I'm not wrong, that data was given, to back. But today I find in my own state, and also I don't know if there is available, we don't have a compendium of science statistics, which tells us how many PhDs, how many in physics, how many in chemistry, how many, I'm just talking of the basics. You have, of course, how many researchers, how many, innovations. We don't have directories. So the third system that I would like to talk about, the third S is basically, fourth S is building science statistics. And when I talk of science statistics, it is not just an inventory of human resources, but it is also an inventory of the kind of journals that we have, the kind of literature that we have, the kind of literature that we have from ancient times. We need to come out with monographs, the kind of outreach we need to have. So let me also connect this to science communication, because as a science administrator, my job is also science outreach and science communication. To be able to attract young children, we should have Amar Chitra Katha series, kind of series in the science field. So graphic novels, those are the kind of things. This is how we must inculcate interest in science from children. So that outreach needs, and I think we should use our own technology to do an outreach for science. We should have, science. Also, I think please include the geriatric population, because in our country, people are retiring at the age of 60 and have longevity till the age of 75, 80. And these are the people who in diverse field are able to contribute. In foreign countries, where I have studied in University of Berkeley, I have sat down with a 70-year-old lawyer, and he is learning the same thing. He is paying little more because today he has the capacity to afford to pay. So please also get all your geriatrics, senior citizens of the country into the field of science. Please also add something for those people. The other thing is science exists for society. Our policies exist for society. So this is my fifth S, and this is society. Unless your science work and policies are translational, unless they solve a problem, I don't think we are moving anywhere. I don't want to do science on paper. I don't want to only have scientists who have peer, evaluated journals. I also want that what work that they have done to have an outreach to community. So I think training of capacity building of our journalists, of our media should also become part of the science policy in terms of governance. I've also mentioned the role of science as solution provider and service provider. That is important. Then building synergies. I think you mentioned it when you were asking Dr. Bhojwani about this. And I would like to emphasize this because it connects very much with my second S of systems, structures, and silos. Today, what we are doing is, for example, to give you an example, I have a SATCOM center and a satellite applications remote center, which works very closely with ISRO. ISRO is doing a whole lot of projects for various departments, but those departments have no idea that these kind of databases are being built for them. For example, we are doing a project for PWD in which we are mapping right from 2000 to 2018 all the Pradhan Mantri Gramin Sadaks which have been made in the state of Rajasthan, but the PWD, till we held a meeting with them, had no idea that this kind of atlas is being made. We have been taught in our field that we must do evidence-based policy making. Now that atlas which is being created, in fact, for the last 20 years, we have huge amount of data, huge amount of atlases. We need to add value to it by allowing research institutions to work on the 20-year data, write papers, do graphics, and forecast the trends coming out of that satellite imagery. For example, let's say that right from 2000, we were mapping all the water bodies in Rajasthan. We did another in 2001, 2002. But that database by itself is not self-speaking database. What we need to do is give that 20-year-old data to an institution which has the credentials to convert that into written form, to add value to it, so that the satellite imagery becomes digestible for the public, so that a civil servant like me can then use that monetized value added satellite imagery to do my policy making and say that these were the drought years, these were the famine years, this is the data we have, these are the districts. The atlas alone does not help me to do it. The monetization of that data, because data today is the new oil. Every information that is being collected is, if given to people, can be monetized. And I think we must look at monetization of our science statistics, monetization of all the satellite imageries that we have captured by putting it down in textual form, easy to understand. So we do science outreach and science communication, monetization, and become an agency that is self-sustaining, right? Because if we don't do it, some private sector is going to do it. I have done a lot of trade negotiations, and I can tell you, we used to buy a lot of such data from private people, foreign agencies. I think we must, high time we have an agency of our own. If you have to establish from start an agency, please announce it and start it. Have people who can study the data and monetize it. That's very, very essential. And I think the last thing, so this is synergies that I spoke about. And also one more suggestion, which I also mentioned to you when we had a meeting, that please have a system of vertical integration. When I was Secretary Food, every once a month, a meeting was called where all state secretaries were present, and there was exchange of good practices. That mutual learning of science administrators of different states is equally important. And I would emphasize that this kind of vertical linkage, please have a system in place where we are talking to you on a very, very formal basis, on a monthly basis, because that is how ideation will happen. And ideation is the fifth factor of production apart from land, labor, capital, and enterprise. And the last thing is, if you want to be self-reliant, you will also need to have cohorts. You have mentioned 21 thematic themes. What we have done in Rajasthan, and this is the last point that I will mention as part of my introductory talk, that you need to have as part of your stakeholder consultations and outreach for better implementation, for that connect. What we have done in the state of Rajasthan, today the state of Rajasthan can very proudly say that for the last 1 year, we have had different cohorts that allows us to be in touch with the stakeholders on a basis. So we have an agri cohort in which all 6 vice chancellors of the agri and veterinary universities of Rajasthan talk to us on a daily basis. We have a biotech cohort which was inaugurated and launched by Secretary DBT, Government of India, Dr. Mukherjee, when she came to Rajasthan. Then we have an IPR cohort of 45 universities. Then we have another cohort called the engineering cohort, which again has state, central, and private universities, colleges, and institutions. We have a startup cohort. We have a launch of the startup ideation, innovation and ideation tomorrow. We are working on a drone policy. So I think and we have a design cohort. So all architectural planning, heritage, and this is not science. People don't understand, take design to be science, but we have got design. So the cohort was named as the science of design, architecture, planning, and heritage conservation, because today you have a design.
Now, please go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for this very warm welcome, and I'm delighted to be here. It is always, in a sense, interesting, as well as you have to devise your thoughts when you listen to some of these things which you were thinking of covering. But in a sense, it makes the debate more interesting. I will go back to your first point, which you said that when you introduced the panel, and you the why we had this policy governance at the more end of the spectrum, and that was of the thematic. And I see that really when
Professor Sujit, may I request you to probably turn off your video, because we can hear you properly if there is an audio. I guess that should work. Professor Sujit? Am I audible? Yeah, I am audible. Okay. Okay, I was just confused. Ki mere taraf se. Professor Sujit, may I request you to turn off your audio, because there is a bandwidth issue at your end. Okay. Let's continue with the conversation when he comes back. I'll expect him to be back in sometime soon, maybe in a minute or so, once the bandwidth is fine. There are three main threads that came out in the introductory remarks. One, the vertical integration, what Secretary Sinha mentioned about. The vertical integration of interstate policy consultations for science, not only for conducting or having policy making at place, but also broadly in a longer run to have programs, implementation strategies, and identifying some of the uniqueness from each state and have cross-learning possible. Having an institutional platform to facilitate that in a very regular way. If I remember Dr. Bhojwani, there was a system like that, at least for the ministries, called Intersectorial Science Technology Advisory Council, which had a regular meetups and to address these issues. Of course, that was not taking into consideration the states at that point of time, but that's when the state councils came into existence. What are your thoughts broadly, Dr. Bhojwani, on this?
Yeah. Hello. Shall I speak now?
Acha, the Professor Sujit is back. Please go ahead, Professor Sujit. Then I'll go to Dr. Bhojwani.
Okay, sorry about it. I think that's the challenge of the technology.
If you feel there is a bandwidth issue, you can switch off your camera and speak so that we can hear you properly.
No, I think it is all right. I think
it is
all right.
Please go ahead.
We have changed the name. Yeah. As I was saying that I come back to the point which you raised, that why we, I also felt it is very interesting that you have put in the different aspects of, as I was going through many of your themes, I see that there is strong interconnect coming back where which policy governance has to look into. These issues of disconnect, issues of ethics, issues of equity, issues of science society contract. And when I was re-examining this, suddenly I found that the COVID-19, I will connect to this COVID-19 pandemic to bring an example, a contextual example in perspective. I saw that we have this whole vulnerability of the health infrastructure, the different countries, not only India, did not know how to react. And then there was what we were trying to say, that various types of what you call uncertainties about science, scientific uncertainties, issues which we talk of, ethical issues of science, science which is coming from various non-peer reviewed science and all that was coming. And so it was trying to say that a certain sort of what you call action points have to be taken. But on the other hand, I found that the science also drove very interesting and very powerful message of how you go for quarantine, what is the lockdown period you should be having, what is the incubation period. So within a very short time, the scientists across the world and various partnershiping with the university, industry and research organizations, you see a different sort of a configuration emerging. So looking back to India, I was very, I would say, very pleasantly surprised and very nicely what you say it started framing. That we started looking at it, these various types of disconnect which we talk about, that funding is not there, disconnect, the industry is not speaking to each other, the research organizations are working in silos. You find that suddenly these concepts of triple helix, concept of coming together, you see these live examples of coming together. It gives a great hope. And not only there, the scientific research organizations went ahead. They started talking of supply chain. CSIR, DST and others started talking of supply chain. And they started intervening into that. Then you see the industry coming forward and putting money to to push the research forward, and the way the government had responded with quick clearance of the clinical trials and looking into this, the issue of, when I was looking at PPE, suddenly the story which is becoming quite now well known is that India, from a huge scarcity, India has become now what you call the second largest PPE. Yeah. But behind it, when you look closely, you see that Sitara and DOE created the guidelines. They created the guidelines for the PPE. They created the 14 testing laboratories were there to see that certain parameters are being set right so that these PPE kits do not come to the market with the proper safeguards. Again, when we are talking of ventilators, I saw that the government taking a very proactive stand to talk of this, looking at this, that talking to this, taking a cue from other countries, but talking to this, what we call this Maruti and the other automobile makers, and synergizing a different type of an activity there to bring the ventilators. The point which I'm trying to draw from this, that these are very interesting learning lessons for us. These learning lessons should not be, on one hand, the learning lesson is that the unpredictability of science, that science also you just have to have a much more system by which you see that you have to understand this changing scenario within which you can't just see a proper peer review, proper process by which science is well established, these particular protocols are well established. On the other hand, you find that the what we call the aspects which we are talking of, the startups and all, which now when we are talking of this new science technology innovation policy, we'll come more into that. We have already, as you have said, that 2013 flagged the inclusive innovation and flagged what we call the innovation per se. But now we are moving into also entrepreneurship models. We have brought in large number of what we call policy strategies, policy focus, looking at how we create an enterprise, S&T enterprise models of startup ecosystem. So when this new policy which we are talking of also has to bring these types of how we integrate these new entrepreneurship into our policy, and at the same time integrate these, what we call, so governance now becomes a challenging exercise. But at the same time, the type of knowledge repositories which we are creating, even this platform which is creating such interesting knowledge repository over this I teach science, technology, innovation policy, and I find that this knowledge repository itself was missing. So these knowledge repositories which we are creating, and these, as our very learned speakers were saying, that the institutionalization of these and the what you call this the involvement of the different stakeholders, which is coming much more important. And these stakeholders involvement is not at the formal system alone. It has to be bringing the informal systems. And so we design the science, technology, innovation policy which accommodates these aspects. Last point which I will say before I close is on this, that we are now facing new science is changing. We are talking of cyber physical systems. We are talking of new technologies which actually are more human-centric technologies. On one hand, when you are talking of IoT, they are generating huge amount of data points which have been talked of, new amount of data and various ways by which you can connect the data. I see that, just taking an example of IoT, you now find around 10 to 12 billion of things connected to the internet. So how to capture these type of data? You require very specialized agencies now, very coordinated data control, where we talk of how we analyze these type of data, a coordinated approach with possibly PSA can take that lead across different ministries, because these new type of data which will be generated will also have one hand very rich data. On the other hand, there will be issues of human-centric aspects. So these aspects also has to be flagged into the policy which so at this point I will end for the thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Bhattacharya and Sujit. The very fact that we wanted to have such a panel with the balance is we have individuals like Dr. Bhojwani, who has contributed to policy system and policy making extensively in his professional and personal capacity in the last few years. We have administrators as Secretary Sinha, we have science leaders as of Dr. Arora, connecting the center-state relationship. But the overall connectivity comes from a very scholarly understanding. And that scholarly understanding is what I think you bring in this conversation. And that's a very fresh perspective, which we lack many a times in our policy discussions. And I'm sure with this, now we will open up for conversation. Of course, there were a few technical issues in the beginning. So I believe that my co-moderator has some technical issues. As and when she joins, we will have her also involved. But now I'm going to open up a Pandora's box, let's say, because governance is not an easy topic to discuss with. And we are going to discuss it with a smile on face, because many a time only blame game happens and the conversation derails. So I'm going to take this conversation to open with Dr. Bhojwani, again, where we had before we had you back in the call, which is vertical integration. The interstate advisory or policy mechanism, similar to what the interministerial one, IS tag, had some time back. What is the status? Are we trying to come up with something of that sort? Is there a scope in this current policy to come up with some institutional mechanism to come up with such a system which addresses the issues that all our speakers so far identified? Dr. Bhojwani, over to you. Dr. Bhojwani, your microphone is muted.
Okay, I think it has just come on here. Yeah, thank you, Chagun. Yeah, see, basically, when did we set up the state S&T councils? This was a proposal that we put to the Planning Commission somewhere in the 1980s. I don't know, around the time of the technology policy, because at that time we were really very much involved in technology and reliance. So that was the period at which we started this, and basically the Science and Technology Council was partly by DST in terms of funding. So and they took up very small projects, to develop, let us say, paddy husk and whatnot. So very small, relevant projects for the states. So state-centric projects and S&T were taken up by the state S&T councils. And since then, they have developed further. They had very good interaction with ISRO in terms of NRDMS and other things. So later on, they have graduated, but we need to have a much sounder mechanism at the present moment, because the country is no longer at that stage in which we were in 80s or subsequently. So we need to have much greater this thing. So what we are suggesting is, basically we are suggesting at the center, there should be a Science, Technology and Innovation Council made up of very eminent scientists, as well as science administrators at the secretary level, and also including chief secretaries of some of the states. So at the center, what we are suggesting is a Science, Technology and an Innovation Council, not only of scientists and technologists from the private sector, bureaucrats from the Government of India, as well as from the states. At the state, we are suggesting not similar, but something that the states should also set up, state S&T innovation councils. The Ministry of Science and Technology and Government of India have suggested to the Finance Commission that 2.5% of the state's allocation in terms of the Finance Commission should be earmarked for R&D, which we are saying should go for state S&T, Science and Technology Innovation Council. In addition, what we are suggesting is another 2.5% as an incentive. I don't know whether this will be approved or not. As an incentive, another 2.5% of the state allocation should be, spent. If it is spent by the state, then the center will match that. The center will give to the states an additional 2.5% if they spend more than 2.5%. So this is what we are suggesting in order to motivate the states to take up science and technology and innovation at a serious level, not only in the small projects, but also significant projects, and also synergizing between the states. It's not that one state should be doing one thing. It's basically 3 states which have, let us say Haryana, Rajasthan, Punjab may have something which is of common interest, right? You share the waters, and so on and so forth. And therefore, it is essential that you have a coalition between the state councils. So this is what we are suggesting. There should be an integration, and the center would naturally be interacting with the state S&T councils. So this is what we are suggesting, and how the interaction could be built up. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Bhojwani. I'm sure both our Dr. Arora and Secretary Sinha would like to jump in and make some remarks over here. I saw the enthusiasm when this came up. Of course, this was not just a surprise, but also a very positive outlook when it comes to state-center relationship in a sector like science and technology. Let me start with Dr. Arora for her comments on this proposition, and then I'll move on to Secretary Sinha. Dr. Arora, please.
Chagun, I feel like quoting Professor Vijay Raghavan. I'll just read what he had written in this report of Economic Advisory Council. He said, "We over the years had many underpowered boats attempting to accomplish big voyages. We need more power to boats. Refurbish them and also facilitate their movement so that they could contribute to the ultimate goal." I think that's what the vision Professor Bhojwani shared. And also, I would like to share that that seed which was sown, in the times Professor Bhojwani mentioned, some of the state S&T councils have really taken it, to develop a banyan tree out of that. For example, talking of Punjab, Professor Bhojwani mentioned the concept of setting up state, science and technology innovation council. Punjab government has already taken an initiative in that direction. In Punjab State Council for Science and Technology itself, another body to give an emphasis to innovation named PRI, Punjab Research and Innovation, has been set up. I also look after that as its Chief Executive Officer. We have also launched Mission Innovate Punjab, wherein we are trying to bring this convergence. We have brought on board all the 30 plus universities and institutions, all the about 17 industrial associations, the government departments, the startup ecosystem partners on one platform, and they are contributing to this Mission Innovate Punjab. On one hand, we are identifying the grand challenges of the state and throwing these open to institutions to solve. We are also identifying unmet technology needs of industry, and taking these to the institutions. And I think this is the vision which the new STIP is setting in place. And I really take pride in sharing that we are already moving in that direction. We've set the ground already on place. And definitely, as I said, the boards need to be powered. This is the time that boards need to be powered. Science and technology is no doubt a very low priority. That's why I said a very low priority area. That's why I said if a proper governance mechanism comes in place, the efforts are aggregated at central level, it will percolate to the state level. And the kind of funding support that was just mentioned, if that starts flowing, I think the state S&T councils, some of the state S&T councils have really done well, as I said, and then stronger can support the weaker if this kind of mechanism is put in place. The S&T councils, which have been able to evolve, transform from taking small time projects to actually contributing to the overall vision of the state. Taking research and innovation across sectors and domains, that kind of vision some of the S&T councils have had. So I think if a proper mechanism is put in place, definitely stronger can support the weaker, and these boards can be powered. I'm very confident on that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's a very positive note. Secretary Sinha?
Yeah, so I think I will agree with what Dr. Bhojwani and also with what Dr. Arora in part has spoken about the state councils and the mechanism. See, I would also say that we also have a very similar experience of what Punjab has done. We also have a state innovation council. I head it as the chief executive officer. But we are all right that in the state, this recognition of science as a solution provider, because scientists and research is something which happens at the back end, and it takes a lot of gestation time. So the states before COVID did not have a realization that this was an area where money could be spent. That is the mindset. But today, with COVID happening, with science communication happening, I think that today is the right time, because I think it is a very, very beautiful amalgam of COVID-19 bringing this realization how important science, research, innovation, and technology is, and also the right time when we will be building policy, because the states and administrators everywhere, even the people at large, are now aware of the importance of investing their time, energy, funds, and resources in this. So that is one thing. The second thing is that I would like to, take from what Dr. Bhojwani has said, two very interesting things, and I just like to add to those things. One is that he has spoken about the need of having, that 2.5% incentives to be given, state councils with bureaucrats to be set up. I think that amalgamation is very necessary. And also what he spoke about, states working together. One of the aspects that we do as part of our science mandate is geographical indicators. And there are certain geographical indicators which are common to a region, because the states came about because of political, administrative, linguistic reasons. But topography is what defines a lot of our working. So he's absolutely right when he says that we should have cohorts of the state who should work together. We have it in art and culture, where we have the 7 zonal centers, cultural centers, the West Zone, the North Zone, where states are parties. We have it in industry bodies where the North, states talk. We also have it in BBT. BBT also has Northern Innovation States. So maybe I think it can all come together. Instead of, my only worry is that instead of replication and multiplication of policies and then some becoming redundant and remaining, because review never happens of policies which don't work, we don't cull them out as such. So my suggestion is that there should also be a mechanism where auto generation of problems to be addressed, which should flow seamlessly to science and technology department instead of scouting for problems, because then we also don't want tough battles. To give you an example, in NGT, I was also secretary industry, so I used to go to NGT every, twice every month, and there were 4 states which were party to this, the burning of the wheat residue, right? The stash burning after harvestation of wheat. Punjab, Haryana, parts of Delhi, and NCR region of Rajasthan. Now, this is a problem which can be solved by introduction of technology. Every state on its own is fighting this matter in the NGT. Every chief secretary of the state is being hauled in NGT. Why can't auto generation of a problem of this nature come to the Department of Science and Technology, and Science and Technology then becomes the expert body which helps all these states to come up with a solution which is common for everybody, and by which all states can then address and have a common kind of. So my thing is, I don't know how we can generate the similar kind of thing is for ambient air quality. These are things which affect all states, and instead of each state reinventing the fire, reinventing the wheel, I suggest that we must, auto generation. Somebody should find a mechanism that if there is a court case related to environment which needs a science solution, then automatically it comes to an expert panel, and expert panel then takes it up with the state and defends it for the state, provides solutions to the state, allows people to do PhD, allows the research labs to do solutions, and brings it. So I think this kind of a mechanism is also very, very essential. The second thing that I would want to mention is that while incentives are very nice to the state, I think we should also kind of, in science communication, this is what I want to refer, that we should also have, fellowships and awards like you have in the Ministry of Culture for people who are not necessarily scientists, but who do deal with science communication, who can write stuff for, building up an agenda for science, because innovators need not be scientists, but they can also write books. They can also write. So I think some kind of mentorship, some kind of fellowship, some kind of awards. So I think building a body of document in the field of science, technology, research, innovation, which connects scientists to society, which is readable, because then you don't have to do this dissemination about, the unpredictability of science. That is the other thing. And the last thing is that we must also develop a mechanism of anticipating problems, which I think it is very, very lacking, because to give you an example, because COVID today is talking about the fact that we must, look at our immune health. The moment this message is out there in the public, what does a department like ours is required to do? What we must do, and what we eventually did is we organized a webinar called A Doctor Who is Invested from the SMS Medical College of Jaipur. And we said we will do a webinar on what is called Know Your Hormones, Know Your Health. because we know that now the focus is on immunity. So anticipating, instead of waiting for something else to happen, we are anticipating. The other thing is we also like to develop a sounding board where, a lot of research is happening. Gandhinagar and Jaipur today are simultaneously working on detection of what you call, COVID-19 15-day in advance from the fecal matter that lands up in the sewage at the STPs of various states. And a lot of research papers have been written, and we have found that instead of doing a swab analysis, which is very person to person, on which we are dependent on the person doing it, both Gandhinagar, Gujarat, and Rajasthan, our research laboratory here, has done this epidemiological survey of COVID-19 using wastewater analysis. Now I need to send this to somebody because my people here don't understand the technology. They are saying, don't know whether it works. I have validation, I have proof of concept, I have everything. I want to launch it as a pilot. Now I need a sounding board which can say, listen, I am so and so, I give you a certificate, please launch it. So that is something that we need to do, some mechanism which allows states, because states don't have the expert capacities. We need some body, we need some knowledge to handhold the state so that we can launch this. So that is another thing. So I think these 4 or 5 things, if we are able to inbuilt in a policy, because we are doing consultations today, I think it will be important. The other thing, and the last thing I spoke about vertical integration, when I spoke about the secretary of DST and the secretaries of the states, to sit together once in a while, maybe on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis, so that the directions on which the country is working, we also get aligned, because we are doing this with our stakeholders. So the stakeholders are not doing research in an area which is redundant, which will find no takers, because when they apply for big grants, people will say, no, this is the. So today, if anybody is working on COVID, we know this is where we are heading. So now seamless kind of integration will happen. And what you are also mentioned is hand-holding of the states, what Madam said, because each state is in a different level of, I won't say weaker or stronger, but I say in different levels of, developmental trajectory in a way. So I think learning from different states, best practices, cross learning from people, meeting their ecosystem, getting to know each other, being on a phone call and saying, okay, are you doing something? Building that, that validation between states, hand-holding. We do it in every other department. I find that why are we not doing in this department? I think we should do in this department as part of an institutionalized mechanism. And I think if we are able to do this, we'll be able to cover a whole lot of ground, is what I want to say. Thank you very much.
No, Secretary Sinha, actually, in the last 15 minutes, the strongest recommendation is about the vertical integration. And vertical integration in multiple layers, not only about the center-state integration, but also about state-state learning, having institutional infrastructure, having platforms for good practices, cross-learning and all of that. Thanks so much for that very clear message. I'm sure everybody who is listening, including the guys who are sitting on top, taking notes to have this policy integrated, will be saying, yeah, this is very important, because for 15 minutes, someone is saying for that. Let me change the gear and move a little bit towards horizontal integration now in the policy governance, STA policy governance. We have discussed a lot about the state policy, state getting integrated, all the vertical things, right? The horizontal thing is all about, I'm sure as a scholar, Professor Sujit is raising hand. I'm sure I'm going to come to him only right now. As a scholar, he would understand exactly where this actually maps, both in the theoretical perspective and in the practical perspective. So I would like to have his response, not only related to what he has urged to respond in terms of vertical integration, but in terms of horizontal integration, science for policy and policy for science. For example, many of these line ministries, sectoral ministries, having policies on energy, health, climate change, sanitation, child and women welfare, all these policies has a component of science and technology. How do we actually build a horizontal interlinkage so that there is a shared ownership, complementarity, not in the way that thinking that why are you stepping on my toe, rather than saying that, oh yeah, let's do it together because there is a complementary strength there. How do we bring that governance in STA? Over to you, Professor Bhattacharya. Microphone is muted, sir. Microphone, please. Yeah. Oh, your microphone is muted, sir. Can you unmute?
Okay.
Yeah, please.
This was a very interesting and very important conversation that happened with about the State Council. And what I see is that the as it is also a learning for us. But what I have seen over the years that we had the district innovation councils, which had actually become what you call, they are many states. I'm not particularly aware about Rajasthan or Punjab, but many states when we have seen these type of district innovation councils are almost non-functional. Second, what I see is that entrepreneurship development institute which are there now getting set up. What I propose can be an interesting thing is that the entrepreneurship development institute links up with the district innovation council as well as the state council. And coming to that, what entrepreneurship development institute can do is that joining ahead with the district innovation council, they organize boot camps across the different districts. The boot camps will bring, what it will try to bring is that identify many of the local solutions that has been done. It is not formal, many informal or very innovative solutions that have been done. And this then gets more structured by the intervention. And then they link up with various, they identified through the boot camps which can be taken up. And then they identified the different programs within which they can connect them. Say, Atal Innovation Mission, whenever I talk to them, they have no idea that they can get funds. They can have these programs. So these type of linkage, if we can get from the bottom up level of, it can be a very interesting model which can, I think, can connect it to this. So there is my what you call a take on this, a new thinking of a new type of a model, because I've seen this, many of them interested, going for the boot camps, bringing out these policies, some of these, but this linkage then they are saying as not there. So this is where point. Second issue which has been very rightly said is about the vertical linkage, very important. And many times these vertical linkages has to be more strengthened. But at the same time, when we are talking of program linkages, we have to talk of these horizontal linkages, and which you have rightly pointed out. Because a solution of a particular problem when we are trying to look at, as we are getting much more interdisciplinary, this nature of science, technology, and innovation is changing. It is changing and becoming much more interdisciplinary. The solution can come from various different type of perspectives, and the solution can come from, as in fact, even Ministry of Art and Culture can think of it in a different way of their program, can connect. So once you think that it's very disparate, it has nothing to do with technology, but then you find that it has a very innovative way of looking at a design of a particular type of a, say, a tube well or a groundwater or something like that. Well, so more when we look at it, the more when we think of these program linkages, what it will not do is that some sort of overlaps are good. Sometimes one says that there should be no overlap. No, some sort of overlaps are good, but also in a larger context, these horizontal linkages brings together what you call the coherent strength. And herein, I again think that a coordinating bodies like this, it should not be that a particular, here one has to also be bit what you call careful about that. If I say that Ministry of Industries takes this role or Ministry of Science and Technology takes this role, then maybe it will seem that one body is trying to take it as a what you call leadership. I will talk of a much more coordinating agency, and with a well-structured coordinating agency, with a good what you call a well-defined body, which looks into these different programs, and then they try to see that how the programs are linked to each other. Because very interesting programs have now come, and very important programs are there now. More as you look at it, more the programs you find. But then, in fact, not only program linkages here, I'm talking of at the central level. The program, many of the programs can be also at the regional level, but also at the, so program linkages has to be at the national level, sectoral level linkages, and regional level linkages. And so the regional, now defining a region can be broader than a state or a smaller than a state. So regional aspect of these linkages are also required. And what it will do, say when I'm talking of this traditional knowledge, say taking an example, I may link up with that program. Say I had found some years back, Kerala government had brought a IPR policy, state IPR policy of Kerala, which was very interesting IPR policy, which was talking of how you integrate this traditional knowledge into the, and how you look into it, which would be of great relevance to those areas of our country, Northeast and other, where have this large traditional knowledge system, knowledge base. I'm not discounting the fact of the importance of others in it. So how we bring that, and part of it goes into our, what we call that, national program. So that is what I see, that the vertical as well as a horizontal linkage across different ministries, across different sectors, and across regional states. These are the two aspects. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Sujit. Actually, the coverage of horizontal versus vertical linkages is pretty extensively covered, let's say, in this conversation now. I would like to move on to the second segment with some different set of topics, because there is a gamut of topics within STI policy governance. Now I see my co-moderator smiling and on the call. Hope the internet is okay. Then, Nimita, are you there?
Hi, Chagun. Hello to everyone once again. I am sitting in Jharkhand doing this moderating, and I have this internet limitations. So apologies to the panelists as well as to the audience for not being on the call for a long time. Very exciting, and unfortunately I've missed a lot, and I regret that. But a very exciting discussion is going on about policy linkages. I would like to take up something about policy to program translation. Most of the time we end up saying that, okay, the policy document looks lovely. It's very comprehensive, very inclusive. We have covered everything in, we have everything. It's like one of the wisdom altogether. But we somehow fail to implement it in the right way, or there are certain bottlenecks that comes into being when it comes to policy to program translation or its execution. I would like to pose a question in this regard to Dr. Bhojwani, that what do you think are the key challenges when it comes to policy to program translation? Over to you, Dr. Bhojwani. Is Dr. Bhojwani online?
Yeah. Maybe his microphone is muted. Dr. Bhojwani? No, I don't see him online. Maybe he had an issue too. Why don't we start with a state perspective on that? Maybe Dr. Arora can.
Yes, I think Dr. Arora could give us a state perspective on that. That would be great. And then later we can come to Dr. Bhojwani to have an overarching perspective on this item. Over to you.
Yeah, I think, prior to this, you were asking about horizontal linkages as well. And I think I would reiterate what I said in the beginning about suggesting a program which could take care of the horizontal linkages, as well as putting a program in place which can take development of country based on science, technology, and innovation to next level. I suggested that the concept of having few innovation cities in the country, if it's taken forward. For example, again taking the example of Mohali, if it's taken forward as an innovation city, every department concerned, will come together to bring in the innovations related to their segment. and put everything together to take innovation forward in that particular city, which would be an ideal example of horizontal amalgamation to my mind. And I think similarly, the two other examples I gave earlier, the other focused programs that needs to be taken forward is putting in place a strong program for building data architecture. And I think I would also like to say here that putting a mechanism in place wherein there is a central point for universities and institutions to come up with what all is happening in the university itself, so that from a single point it can be brought forward to the nodal point in the state, and it can then feed into the central point. That would be, I think, a program which can provide the right kind of linkages. And I totally agree with Ms. Sinha. There has to be a program, there has to be a mechanism wherein coming forward of the problems being faced in different sectors comes on an autopilot mode. It's automatically starts flowing to science, technology, and innovation. I think sometimes if you put a best practice in place, then it kinds of takes forward from there. For example, I'll give you an example of Punjab here. We have been able to put one particular sector on autopilot mode in terms of problems flowing to science, technology council. We had, say about 20 years back, taken a conscious decision that there has to be a technical body which provides cost-effective solutions to industry, especially medium and small industry, for pollution control and energy efficiency. So I'm talking of only one sector, say environment sector. Since Madam mentioned about NGT, so that readily came to my mind. So we had set up this this cell, special cell, which was providing this. That cell was set up within the state S&T council. And over this period of, say, about 20 years, it has churned out numerous technologies, supported more than 7,000 MSME for cost-effective solution. And as a result, now, wherever there is a problem which the industry faces, the state pollution control board faces. For example, recently there was an issue of industry having to convert from coal to PNG. They were trying to convert, but they were not getting the cost economics. So automatically the problem flew into the state, this cell that we have set up in the state S&T council, and we jumped into field, and now we'll be setting, say, 4 or 5 demo units in industries, which will be replicable. So I think sometimes the best practices have to be put in place, which then find replication.
Thank you, Dr. Arora. I completely agree what kind of topics you have touched upon about linkages. I'm sorry, the doorbell as well. Thank you. So coming to the idea that I think even the audience outside my house agreed to this idea. But I believe that you rightly said that there has to be integration between institutions. There has to be positioning of best practices which are implementable, executable, in order to put it as a model which would work in terms of doing this policy to program translation. And however, I do believe that there are challenges which is related to, say, capacity in itself, in terms of the policy officials itself, like in terms of capacity building of the people who are in the policy making, in terms of doing this policy to program translation. On that note, I will go to Secretary Sinha, that if you could elucidate on that idea of, say, capacity, because I could see a question coming on our YouTube as well, that we need capacity building requirement. It's from Anurag Kanogia, for the development of certain systems for coordination and integration. And I think I can draw it from there, and we can talk about policy and program linkages. So over to you, Secretary Sinha.
Thank you, Ms. Pandey. I think that's a very relevant question, and as Dr. Arora was speaking, I think this is one point that I wrote down also. When we all join our new departments, and science is a very, very specific, it has a very specific agenda. It is not something that we do in the districts as district collectors. It involves, even at the state level, a whole lot of policy building, and emanating from that, a whole lot of implementation. What I find lacking, and I would, as a very humble suggestion, lay before this consultative group, is that we get trained in an academy called the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration. And I have done all phases. There are 5 phases. I mean, as per my level, I have done all 4 phases. And I have found that till I became Secretary Science, it did not even occur to me that during all of our trainings, there is absolutely no exposure about science, technology, research, innovation in our academic training. And I would very, very strongly suggest that, there is a slight danger. What is happening today is the moment you say technology, we have governance by apps. An app is made and we think that that is governance. So I keep reiterating the fact that app is not by itself governance. If you don't have policy structures, the app is very personal oriented. You move to a department, the department which was doing app or district which was doing app will collapse. So my request is that orientation of administrators in science should become a very, very institutionalized part of orientation of all training institutions which produce academicians, which produce science administrators, which produce science communicators, and this should also become a very, very strong part of all Indian institutes of mass communications, all universities, a little bit of orientation, because writing about science is very difficult. My department was able to do the kind of outreach because within 2 months of my joining, I had a workshop on science journalism, where I ensured that all departmental PROs and all newspaper correspondents, media people were trained. We got people from Vigyan Prasar and we made them sit 2 days and move from each topic to each topic. And that is how today they know what the department is doing. They're doing all the outreach. So you have to invest in capacity building. So that is suggestion number 1. The other suggestion is please use the science administrators, because we can bridge the gap between scientists who work in silos, between the journalist who writes stories about them. And we don't want miscommunication happening, because one party doesn't know, one party only knows very hi-fi jargon. And society needs to appreciate the scientists. The scientists that work in the state always feel that we do not get any validation from society. Society does not understand us. So I think that tripartite communication can only happen once administrators are trained into this field. The other thing is, I also feel capacity building of administrators, of scientists, of academicians should also happen by the way which WTO and WIPO does, by having these online courses. So when I was doing international trade negotiations, if I wanted to be successful, I had to pass certain courses, take certain courses which WTO, World Trade Organization, offers. So I know the jargon. So I know the tricks of the trade. I think that is also something which must be built, and we must develop our own content to train people at various levels, depending on what kind of training is required. The other and last thing probably I say is, because there's a lot have been said of how to translate policy into action. Please use your own concept of science to do it. I am a bureaucrat and I'm totally against building more bureaucracy. I have not done it in my Department of Science and Technology. I have only focused on action that can be taken on the ground, supported by bare minimum paper at the back, which is necessary for audit, because I want to do things and I want to do the things properly, but I want to do it in the least possible time. The gestation time between a policy and implementation should happen in my own tenure time for the department to have trust. So building trust with your stakeholders is very, very important. Giving access is very, very important. And science is all about experiment. So please do not build a policy which is 50 pages long, which nobody is going to read. Scientists already have so much of work to do. I don't want them to read so much of policy. Come up with small schemes, doable, chewable bites of those policy and put them into action. Get proper application forms for things. The application forms are so poorly drafted. Standardization, having SOPs in place is what is the meat in terms of implementation. Get those SOPs right. Because if a doctor is able to write a prescription that can be then digitized, that is what is going to get converted into AI. Because if the doctor writes, one doctor writing something in Punjab, another doctor writing something in Punjab, that is why you have today switched to generic salts. So do something generic so that integration, so that digitization, so that building of statistics. Because if Punjab does something differently, I do something differently, how are you going to build the statistics of states? How are you going to have states do innovation indexes of the state? And the other and the last thing is, when we talk of the state, the Millennium Development Goals or the Sustainable Development Goals as they are now called, I find that there is no integration at the international level and the state level. So today is a time when we see that we have two very big, one at the ministerial level, one at the scientist level, people representing WHO. I think there is also high time to have an institute of the like of WHO in the country for science diplomacy. That science diplomacy is not happening. I get a lot of paper in my dark which talks of Japan wanting to do, some kind of a policy they have done. My scientists cannot straight away apply. They need state backing. I think we need to have science diplomacy also built in our, and what is happening when we did a agri cohort meet, all my VCs were telling me, VC Jobner, VC Udaipur, these are all people who come from government of India and working in the state. They are all telling me, ma'am, we have done MOUs with 6 universities in Arkansas, Virginia. The idea is not to do MOU. How are you able to crystallize that MOU, commercialize that MOU is important. Without this mechanism of doing that, every university will only have MOUs which are signed names, but not leading to any kind of transfer of technology. So there is what you call a strategic commercial dialogue between India and US. I'm sure there are similar dialogues which exist between different. I think science should become a very, very important part of that dialogues, and you must have states send proposals based on the kind of work that they expect, based on the kind of MOUs that exist in the universities, to feed into those kind of mechanisms. I think that is very important. And some kind of institutionalized mechanism for that should also be established, I feel, so that there is a through and through connection which happens.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Secretary Sinha. Actually, it was her turn to come in, but I have jumped in because you have touched upon two of my very favorite topics. One is science diplomacy and having a para-diplomacy connected to the states, right? This is something that we discussed yesterday also. Yesterday's panel was on exactly this topic. Like you rightly said, people always orient scientific diplomacy or technology diplomacy or international cooperation only with the national or a central level. But there are a lot of para-diplomacy that happens with the states like Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, or Karnataka, for example. I'm just taking these southern states, not because of a bias, I'm just saying this as an example. They have done Tech Summit, International Tech Summit, where they directly attract their scientific talent, connected with the international industries, international diaspora who have skilled manpower to contribute to. I think states have a role to play in this. I would certainly agree, and I'm really glad that you brought up this point. Particularly now we are discussing the program to policy or policy to program translation, if I put it right. Dr. Arora gave this very good perspective of how that can be done. And you gave a longitudinal perspective of this translation can happen not only at the state level, but that needs connections to the center as well as to the international governance perspective of science and technology. With that tone, I would just like to quickly turn towards Dr. Bhojwani, who just joined back after a small technical glitch. Dr. Bhojwani, we are discussing how policies that can have good translation itself into programs and get implemented. Well, in your experience as a CSIR person, how would you say this policy to program translation can really be successful? I'm sure it's not always a blue June good image about policy to program translation in country like India. A lot of criticism. We have both. I mean, it's a mixed bag. We have hits and a miss. We would like to hear from you. How do you actually define the success of policy to program translation, and what is your advice for states and for central ministries and agencies to have a successful translation? Over to you, Dr. Bhojwani.
Yeah, thank you, Chagun. Basically, what has happened is at the center we look only at the larger, aspects or programs. That is the policy being translated into programs, but at a larger scale. We have so far really not looked at the states. Let us be honest about it. Yeah, we have not taken the states part into consideration. Although the states may be the actors who would be implementing or doing those things, but consciously we have not really involved the states. That is true. So basically, what we have seen is, you look at the universities. They have been entering into MOUs, as we have pointed out, without understanding what those MOUs mean, what the things imply. There are, lot of genetic information, not only human, but even plant and animal, has been given away without understanding what we have done through the university system. Right. So basically, you're right. I mean, the point which has been made is right, that we have to involve the states. How do we involve the states in our decision making, in translation the policies into programs? That is the thing. So that is what we had mentioned, that we will have a state innovation council where the states would be involved. And the state innovation councils, we would have a dedicated person in the DST who would be looking into the interaction and collaboration with the states. So we are going, this is the suggestion that we have made. That is to have more interaction with the states, to have a dedicated person in the Department of Science and Technology and other science ministries who will be interacting with you, because the central ideas, the policies at the center have to percolate and interact with the states. So that is the idea that we have had. Thank you, Chagun.
Shagun just took the limelight from me at some point because it was his topic of intervention. But connecting to the question, and I completely agree to what Professor Dr. Bhojwani says, that state has never been taken into account when policy is being taken. And we have two policy leaders from the state, and they know it better. And I think we all are in congruence with what has been already said. I would not leave Professor Bhattacharya on this, and I would ask him as a scholar as to what determines the success and failure of any policy, because and there could be a lot of other externalities that affect the success of a policy, and it is in context to policy to program translation. So what are your takes? Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it is very difficult to actually say what a good policy is. But then when you look closely at various policies which have made an impact, you see that there have been very measurable targets have been built in. And there were STI indicators here I will talk of. And very well, we again reiterate that the evidence-based STI indicators, measurable targets, and putting them into what you call, here we have one weakness in our STI system, that the way we have to collect the data, where we have to, when we are talking of these program linkages also, the data sharing, data aspects, which becomes very important on this. That so these, the success of a policy would, in a sense, would try to show that whether these, through the indicators, and indicators are not that as a top down we create those indicators. The indicators, we are developing these indicators as measurable targets, and we are, and it is the objective in a sense are not static at one point of time. As we face the new challenges, as COVID becomes an interesting example because it's so current. and so important. You see that the STI indicators, the measurable targets is changing. And so that dynamic STI indicators, the evidences which we are collecting, how we put in therein. So this is one aspect of a good policy. Also, another aspect of a good policy is that how the over the years, as rightly, it was very nice that the way Dr. Bhojwani started the whole thing, that we learning from the earlier policies. This learning has to be built in this new policy. That what is the new learning which we are getting, and learning is also not only of the success; it is also the failure. Failure is never a failure in a sense. Failure is always a learning. That say I am trying to do something new. Otherwise, if trying to do something new, I am not able to succeed. What has been this? Was it there is something like that which many of our states council leaders are talking of on, or there was something where we could not really take that particular technology forward. So these points becomes important when we are talking of this, what you call it, good policy is all about. Good policy is also about that that again, as our Science Council, Dr. Sinha has said that we do not have, we require very well constructed research now at this point to see that how we had a particular what the impact of that policy was we have to have these very socio-economic studies and all different type of studies, and I would say that we require more STA scholars like that who can bridge these types of gaps, who can be part of this, be looking at these evidences, putting this socio-economic impact in the policy. So policy may have, it may not have a, if you suddenly you say that it has been a very failure in a sense of not giving an economic impact, but maybe it had given a great social impact, which has been not been missed at all, which has been missed. So my indicators now should be able to actually capture that aspect also, to say that yes, this type of thing which has happened. So here I am talking of two things. One is that have very well understanding of and very well coordinated actions by which we create our indicators, and it has to be exercise like this, which the exercise which we are doing, exercises like this, bringing different things and all that. And secondly is that gather these types of evidences, able to have this, and we should learn from each other in a sense. Science is beautiful in a sense that we can learn from others also. When I was looking at how we are creating, I am a bit diverging a bit, but this is one of a favorite topic of mine. When you look at the way you capture the data, look at the data and all that, you see that there are interesting model outside. There are particular act. If you looked at USA, there is a evidence act which they have found, which they have created, and that evidence act they are updating so fast. 2020 again they have these very action point that how the data have to be created. So new, when I am going for a new project, I am saying that do I have already an evidence of an earlier from which I can learn from that and I take it forward. So these all are connected together. As you see that program linkages, vertical linkages, the data, and this type of looking at it together. I think these have to be wrapped up together within our, when we are talking of. It is not so easy, and that is why so many of uh, STI scholars are there. So many people from very different interdisciplinary backgrounds are there. So that is the point which I am trying to stress here, that and bring in a larger perspective. Many of us are now talking of systems perspective, talking of these. So these are theoretical words, but they have to be translated, as rightly said by Dr. Sinha and Arora and others, that we have to translate into what you call actionable and understandable. points. It should not be that you create those jargons and you don't know what is the meaning of those jargons. So those jargons of connectivity, those jargons when we talk of open innovation, when we talk of how we have a particular type of technology in our shelf, how we share that technology. At the same time, when we are talking of sharing these things, the issues of copyright, issues of many other issues come into this. So this is a very specialized area where we have to develop this manpower across. And just last point which I will say that I was involved in this, in what we call, in talking about when the plagiarism issues came across last 6 months. I found that many of them do not even know that it is a plagiarism. So understanding of these copyright rules and plagiarism, that what it is. So all these brings together. So it seems that these are disconnected, but in a sense they are not disconnected together. They become wrapped up within that governance system which we have to bring. So there I will.
So with Nimita's permission, I'm going to twist the table. Nimita, may I?
Of course, Chagun. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. See, the thing is, it's a very interesting conversation, but we have a limited time when it comes to such interesting discussions. I am going to actually come to a point of coherence in this discussion. Of course, we wouldn't cover every small point under the gamut of STA policy governance and program policy linkages. But I believe that we have done justice to at least few important aspects such as policy to program translation, vertical interconnectedness, horizontal interconnectedness, creating state center STA policy governance system, institutional platforms. One critical aspect that I want to put forth for our discussion now, and then get your concluding remarks with respect to what kind of a what do you call a flag bearing change that you would expect in science technology innovation policy 2020 for a long lasting STI policy governance system in the country with states and smaller granular entities into account. I would start with probably Professor Dr. Bhojwani and ask him to give his concluding remarks on what one major change, in addition to what he proposed as a major recommendation that he has already given for the drafting committee, that he expects in this policy to change our, not change, but maybe strengthen our STA policy governance system. Over to you, Dr. Bhojwani.
Yeah, thank you, Chagun. See, basically, we have to give, as it has been pointed out, the recent times, basically the COVID pandemic, has brought to fore the importance of science and technology. So far, science and technology has been not given the due importance. Formulate the science and technology policies, innovation policies. But these were, taken by the other departments and the government and even the public as policies only for scientists and technologists. They were not meant as policies, as national policies for all, for not only the people in the government, but also the public and the private sector. So they were considered purely as, policies meant for scientists only to, give them incentives and, motivate them to higher values. Just like saying that R&D expenditure would be 2%, or, we would give incentives to the scientists and so on and so forth. The number of papers should increase. So the basic idea was the people used to think that, the scientific policies are only for the scientists. We have to now make it that these policies are not only for the scientists, but these are national policies. These are meant for the nation. Right. So basically, what I had been suggesting, that in order to give this recognition has to come at the highest level of the government. The cabinet of the government, we have to have a cabinet committee on science and technology and innovation. So with that recognition, there would be a cross-cutting, because the members of the council, that is Science, Technology and Innovation Cabinet Committee, would be the cabinet ministers of the concerned ministries, human resources, finance. Just take the case of the present, they have got a national intellectual property rights policy. Now, how is that integrating into the science and technology innovation policy? That's a very critical element of science, technology, and innovation policy. Is it integrating into that? We have not seen that, So we have to see that this integration takes place. And how this integration takes place would be through the, once we have got a recognition at the highest level that there is a cabinet committee on science, technology, and innovation with all the relevant cabinet ministers as members, this recognition would come and there would be concordance between the different policies and recognition by different ministries and the government sector of technology and innovation policy for the nation and not only for the scientists. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhojwani. That's a very, very powerful recommendation. I'm sure that recommendation is captured already in our drafting process. Having that highest recognition and having that tied to an institutional structure connecting all the states, ministries, and departments is going to be completely revolutionary. I mean, I have that optimistic belief there. With that, let me move to Dr. Jatinder Kaur Arora for her concluding remarks with respect to what and how she expects this particular policy to make a positive change in the ecosystem as far as the policy governance is concerned. Over to you, Dr. Arora.
I think I want to start by applauding childlike, honest confession of Dr. Bhojwani that states were really not taken along earlier. And I think that's the change I expect, that the states are truly plugged into the national circuit, and they can really make the difference, as I said earlier. These are the nodal points at states which can bring the stakeholders together, and that will finally lead to actually science, technology, and innovation helping the country achieve the sustainable development goals. I think I would, to emphasize that, I'll again quote Professor Vijay Raghavan. He said, if our scientists and institutions see the government and industry as partners in future of the country, miracles can happen. And miracles can happen only if there is an effective linkage right from the states to the center. And as I said, the partners at the state level can make the miracles happen within the state by bringing all the stakeholders together, especially industry. We have a Make in India movement, Make in India program, but how can MSME actually contribute to Make in India program? They can only do if a strong technology footing is provided to them. But if you actually truly go to the institutions, in neighboring institutions along with the MSME cluster, they don't even talk to each other. For example, if I go in a particular cluster, I go to Jalandhar, I look at the leathery, I look at the leather complex, the sports industry, the industries, the institutions around Jalandhar are not working at all on the problems related to these industries. So I think that's the difference that can be made if STIP takes care of the suggestions that we gave. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. I'm sure the policy, because for the very nature that it is involving and including every aspect and every voice, that will take care of these changes for sure. Let me move on to Secretary Sinha, patiently listening to all these powerful recommendations and thoughts. I would like to hear from her for her concluding remarks. Secretary Sinha.
Thank you very much. So I think I will not repeat what has been said by the previous two speakers, but I will add something. Two very important things that I would like to see in the policy is, one is that it should be very, very outcome based. So let the policy, because science and technology is changing at a very, very, changing incrementally, but at a very fast pace. So please make the policy only for a short duration, say 5 years, because your technology is going to completely become redundant after 5 years. You will have to relook. So a short-term policy, a long-term in that sense, a 5-year policy maybe, but outcome-based policy. So at the end, you should know where you have reached in the 5 years, and maybe you can extend it if you want. But I think a policy which has outcome-based, clearly defined what are the outcomes, so the states know what are the actionable points around those outcomes. One. The second is, while we've spoken of horizontal and vertical linkages, I would also like to see something, a dashboard or something which talks about not just policy like you have in the food. I would request you to see the Ministry of Foods portal, how all states are linked through APIs in kind of terms we are doing. And competitive collaboration is what I would like to see, because just linkages alone do not help. A very happy kind of and healthy kind of a competition between states also enables you to nudge people to move on to the next level in terms of development. So I think that is only possible when the sharing of data of all states, activities of all states become combined on a single portal, where the states are contributing, updating on a daily basis, and the portals are visible at one point to all people. I think we were doing it in food, and that is why all of us were able to jump to the next trajectory of development in our food. So that is what I'd like to see in the policy, a mechanism for that. Three more things, and I'll end with that. One is, when we talk of science, science is not for us. Science is for the citizen. So I would like to see an approach which is more citizen-centric. So citizen-centric science is how I would like to see the face of the policy. Open science is something that we have been talking about, because sharing of information, where data is the new oil, information is the new oil, is something that should happen. A mechanism for knowing what Punjab is doing without having to interact with Punjab is something. What people in Punjab are doing, what researchers in Punjab are doing. If open access is available, I think that is important. I am totally not in favor of new bureaucracies, because the old ones don't die and new ones get created. So I think the policies should address, please follow the Archimedes principle of the lever, with minimum effort, maximum output. He is my favorite scientist. Hannah, you give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum long enough, and I will move you just give me that foothold in the policy. Don't define everything. Leave a lot of flexibility for the state to customize policy, because science is pretty much fungible. So only give those directions. Let the policy be very fungible, like grass and not like a tree. It could bend with changing technology, it could adjust, and you don't have to change the technology. So that is what I would like to see. And please have lot of focus on science communication, because I think in times to come, with technology changing, capacity building and communication in science will become very, very important, to be able to connect wisdom of science, which emanates from science, to the solutions to the problems of citizens. I think those are the things I would like to see very, very featured, very, very prominently in the new STIP policy draft. I think simple is also something, so that the people can align with it. It should be a draft not for policymakers. It should be a Gita or a constitution for each and every citizen of this country, is how I would like the document. Readable, understandable, easy, simple, with a lot of recall value. That is how I'd like to see the STIP policy 2020, and good luck to everybody who is very, very closely associated with it. And thank you so much for such a valuable learning, interactive learning experience with all of you today. My heartiest compliments and congratulations for the long road that you have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Secretary Sinha. We are not leaving you if you're thinking this is the end of it, and it's not us. We are doing it all together, and that's the very core of this whole policy. Like we always say, there are 5 mantras of the STIP 2020. Decentralized, bottom-up, experts-driven, evidence-supported, and inclusive. And we are not saying that you do it, we all do it together. And with that, I just want to congratulate for bringing up all these extraordinary points, what you just mentioned. Every single point that you said, people-centric policy, understandable, direct focus, action-oriented, output-driven, all those are excellent. Thanks for that. But I just want to touch upon one thing which made me so curious, how leaders align their thoughts. Because one of the points that don't make it too long, make it directly to a short-term, direct-oriented. Secretary of DST, just a couple of days before, he said, like, Chagun, we have to make this policy a dynamic policy. Is there a concept called dynamic policy? We have to make that. Because every now and then, within a short span of time, we have to see if the policy is outdated and correct it. We have to come up with the exit strategy. I think when you were saying this, I was thinking like whether did they talk already about this or is there any alignment? So yeah, with that, thank you so much. Now let me move to our scholar in this panel, Professor Sujit Bhattacharya, who is listening also. I'm sure he's taking a lot of research questions from all these ideas coming up for his students and scholars, not only in India, but globally. Professor Sujit, what would you exactly would like to see in this particular policy, which can make a big difference? Professor Sujit?
Thank you. Yeah, it was a great learning experience, not only for this panel throughout, and there is a very good repository. In fact, I am editor-in-chief of a journal also, Journal of Scientometric Research. And I will also not leave you people, and I will ask you also to contribute there in that policy forum and all. What I find here in this interesting is that what my take would be that echoing the same thoughts of the others, that everyone should be able to own up this policy. Earlier it was science, technology, innovation policy. It was good, but it was as if it was a policy for Ministry of Science. But here, once the policy comes, I think it is a challenge, but I think we are already moving and addressing that challenge. The industry will also wake up and say that yes, there are very interesting elements of it in this policy. And let us talk to these people around that strengthen this partnership again. Same when I look at the different ministry, the ministries will look at it. Oh, it is not only a science, technology, innovation policy of a Ministry of Science and Technology and PSA office, but it is a policy where we also have been engaged and it's part of our policy also. That ownership is one of the grounding of a successful policy, which I see. Then what I see is that we have to, that it should excite also, say, the scientist enough, researcher enough to say that I go for a new idea, and the policy supports my new ideas. The policy tells me that yes, you have a support system for starters, for the young researchers, so across this stream. So this is what also this policy has to be about. And final remarks of mine is that when I talk to people across, I see that they are not talking of, taking one example of information communication technology. They are talking of information society technologies. So the nomenclature itself has a great meaning. Once you say that information society technologies, you are bringing different set of actors to design your information communication technologies. You are bringing in your panel people from social sciences, people from humanities, people from various different streams together. And when society technologies are there, you are also bringing those people across, the informal set of people across. So the policy, in a sense, this would, in my last point, that policy in a sense would reflect upon that underlying aspect of that would be this. So I think with that, it was a very interesting and very exciting. Really, thank you so much for the invitation to me on this. And thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Sujit. I know you are a very positive person and your scholarly pursuit in this area has been very, very helpful for all of us. With that, all the concluding remarks, I just want to put one thought saying that the STIP 2020 has a lot of spillover effects, right? The very sense of having all of us working together makes it more inclusive, and the spillover effects goes beyond this policy making process. And we had that long conversation with Dr. Arora that day about how can we make state data architecture, how can we build state policy research capacities, how can we create STI policy fellowship programs at the state level. I mean, we are all, myself, Nimita, we are all product of such a fellowship program at the national level. Now we are in an opportune and privileged position to interact with leaders like you all. I think such opportunities could also be created at the states level. And to add on to that, a state level science advisory mechanism similar to what we have at the national level, a principal scientific advisor or a chief scientific advisor at the state level, which means to say data aspects, the data dashboard and everything that drives into policy aspect, policy capacity building, policy research, and then to go towards having an informed science advice mechanism within the state level and connecting it to not only the national system, but also to the global system directly. That should be a spillover and an outcome effect of this overall policy process. I'm sure we are going to have more such engagement with Secretary Sinha and Dr. Arora on those aspects. I'm looking forward to sharing some more details also to take it further at the state level, to create some of the model states with these aspects and to emulate and try to build at the national system. With that, without further ado, we have already well past our timeline. I really have no intention to end this call because I am enjoying really. I will, before Nimita jumps on and said like, shut up, Chagun, I'm going to hand it over to her and say like, please take over Nimita and formally conclude. And then we'll look forward to another interactive session like this. Nimita, over to you.
Chagun, it has been more interesting because the young brigade is driving this. Chagun, Nimita, and all your fellow teams. Yes.
Clap to them, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Arora. And as you rightly said, I would have continued this discussion with you forever if we could. But I think our audience, we shouldn't penalize them for this, and we can definitely carry on these discussions on different other platforms. With this, we come to the end of today's panel. True to the essence of this panel series, this has been a very fruitful discussions to bring in multiple perspectives and viewpoints on STI policy governance and program linkages, which is very relevant for the STIP 2020 policy making process. As rightly said, that the states have very important role to play, and just to add on to it, the track 3 in itself is very much dedicated to this idea, and we will be engaging with states on that. I thank our esteemed panelists, Dr. Bhojwani, Professor Bhattacharya, Dr. Arora, and Secretary Sinha for taking time to be with us, to engage with us, and giving their valuable inputs. However, for the audience, I would say the discussion doesn't end here, and we would encourage our audience to engage on the Science Policy Forum. We have a discussion forum. Please put in your comments and questions. All the questions posted on the social media will be taken into account. So please don't feel disheartened if the questions have not been taken on the call. And the last but not the least, a big shout to the front end and the back end team of the Science Policy Forum, the Gooby Lab, as well as the STIP 2020 Secretariat for making this happen. I would say that this is the second last panel. We have the last panel tomorrow, which is on weather and climate research and services in India. So please tune in tomorrow to be a part of that panel. We look forward to have you tomorrow. Thank you and have a great evening. Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. May the panelists stay for